Go. Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Renee Paichaki and I am part of the programming committee of PAX, Public Art Exchange. And what we are gonna do tonight is have a PAX talk. Can you guys see what are you looking at right now? Just the presentation or?
You can see your
my whole screen.
Okay, we'll discuss
Okay.
it.
Well, we might just have to live with that, won't we? Sorry, I thought I had set this up properly, but I guess I did not. So I'm just going to go from memory and actually just share the presentation. So welcome to PAX. Welcome to a PAX talk. I'm Renee Paichaki, and I am part of the programming committee along with Laura Zorch McDermit. Laura Zorch is the director of Laramie Public Art, which is a pretty incredible organization in Laramie, Wyoming. I'm really excited to get to hear from the whole creative team, including Laura, Aubrey, and Conor, about High Iron. I had the chance to go out there a couple weeks ago to see the project in person. And before we hand the mic over to Laura, I just really want to thank the team, one, for, just doing such an incredible project, but also for taking on a topic, right, that includes work, labor, immigration, race, such a nationally important conversation right now. And it was really beautiful to experience all of the projects that explored this theme. So Laramie Public Art, I'm just going to brag on Laura for a second, as I mentioned, is a pretty incredible organization. And all of the people on this call know, all our public art colleagues on this call know, it really takes a combination of vision, patience, a strong backbone to make a successful public art program. So Laura's not going to talk about all the incredible work that she's done over the past 5 years tonight, but I really encourage you to check out Laramie Public Art Coalition to understand the breadth of the work, how this project fits in, a national project fits into what they've been working on, and also just how many incredible opportunities she's opened up for local, national, and regional artists in Laramie. So one more slide from me before we hand it over to Laura. As I mentioned, we usually do this at the end, but we're going to do it in the beginning as people are trickling in. This is a PAX talk. PAX is Public Art Exchange. It is a group of public art friends, colleagues, people interested in public art who really just get together to kind of geek out about the field. We have a website and there is a online platform you can engage with, and there's a listserv. We do a lot of programming. We do PAX talks. We do a kind of like 5x5 event a couple times a year. I really encourage you to get involved. It's a great way to meet your colleagues in the field. And if you're feeling flush, please consider a donation to PAX. It is 100% volunteer run. So Laura, take it away. I'm excited about your presentation tonight.
Well, hi, everybody. Thank you so much for that introduction, Renee. That was very kind. I'm coming from Laramie, Wyoming here this afternoon, and I have the great pleasure and honor to be here with my team members for High Iron, who really made this project go and are the heart and soul of High Iron. So I want Aubrey Edwards and Conor Mullen here to give a little wave. So Aubrey Edwards is a cultural anthropologist here in Laramie, Wyoming, who has been working with stories of labor and uplifting those stories of labor in our region for the past few years. And she came from New Orleans in 2021, right, Aubrey? Yeah, and has made Laramie such a better place to be. And also Conor Mullen, who is an artist in Denver now, but by way of Laramie, Wyoming, and is just an incredible community connector and was an amazing artist lead for our team here in High Iron. So tonight, just sort of run a program here, run a show for you all. Conor and I are going to introduce the project to you for about the next 15 minutes. And then we're going to pause for a moment to take any initial questions that might bubble to the surface from you all here this evening. And then we're going to dig in a little bit deeper to the process and how we worked on this living monument here that just opened September 27th in Laramie, Wyoming. So at any point, if you want to interact in the chat, that's amazing. And I'm going to start to share my screen. And as I do that, actually, I want you all to actually get in that chat immediately and tell me what you know about Wyoming. If you've been here, if you've not been here, what are the things that pop into your mind immediately about this place? So get in there, don't be shy. You're probably all like, I just came here to listen. Well, let's have a little bit of interaction here. Hopefully everybody can see that. Let's see what they're saying in the chat. Cowboys, wind, blue sky, horses. Open country, big space, not a lot of people. Yeah. All of these things are true, right? So Wyoming has this sort of some of the first things that people think about, that kind of cowboy culture, the endless, vast expanse of the landscape, the isolation. There's not many people here, right? And I think there's really been a narrative built here about kind of that lone cowboy, the white man here out on the land, caring for their cows on their horse. And High Iron is sort of a direct response to that, right? So after the Civil War here in this place that we now call Wyoming, that is on the forcibly ceded lands of the Cheyenne, the Northern Arapaho, the Crow, and the Shoshone people, was actually one of the most diverse places to be at that time, because a lot of immigrants came to this place to build these communities that we now call home here in Wyoming. So High Iron is a project that uplifts those narratives of labor and of immigrant labor here in our state. And we're gonna, I can move this forward maybe. There we go. But Wyoming, right? Some people are saying this sort of desolate landscapes, and yes, that's what it looks like, right? So here is a picture in 2024, and then a picture right beside her from 1880 that was by Joseph Stimson of the same space. And this space is featuring these rocks here, are rocks that created the only monument until September 27th for the railroad in the state of Wyoming. And that is the Ames Monument. So the Ames Monument is about 20 miles outside of Laramie, Wyoming, where we are today. And the Ames Monument is a monument to two brothers, the Ames brothers, who financed and swindled the Union Pacific Railroad to white men. So there was no monument here in Wyoming about rail labor and about the people who actually built the communities that we're living in. So High Iron is the direct response to that, right? To uplift those stories of real labor, of the people who built these communities and cared for each other along the way. So in May, May 1st, just like 5 months ago, almost 6 months ago, we received a boxcar. You can find anything on Facebook Marketplace, and we found our boxcar on Facebook Marketplace in the state of Idaho. And it arrived in Laramie on May 1st. You can see it was snowing in where we are, which amazing. So we got this boxcar, and the boxcar, when we were sort of thinking through, like, what does this project need to be? Because while it is in Laramie right now, it will be traveling, and it will travel across the state starting next summer. It will go to most likely Cheyenne next. And as it moves through the state, it's going to collect more stories, change and adapt to meet those communities where they are. And so this boxcar is a way for us to connect those communities. So, when you think about Wyoming, there's these towns. So Cheyenne is about 55 miles away from Laramie, and between Laramie and Cheyenne, there is not really anything. And so we had to be really creative and think about how can we get this project from one place to another, and connect these communities that are pretty disconnected, right? So Laramie and Cheyenne and Rollins and Rock Springs, all of these communities along the rail line were all like end of track towns, right? As the railroad was being built. And we've stayed that way. There's not been connection between these communities since the railroad was built. So that felt really important for us to be able to connect those communities through these stories as well as we move forward with the project. You can see this is what the boxcar actually looks like today. So once we got the car, we had the interior refurbished by some contractors here in Laramie. They did an amazing job creating sort of a listening space here in the front, and what you see in the front, with also a lot of union ephemera. So there's the Brotherhood of Locomotive and Trainman Engineers charter that hangs on the wall. It's the oldest union in the state of Wyoming. It was founded 4 days after the golden spike was put in the ground in Utah. And Wyoming wasn't even a state at the time. So in the charter, actually, you see state is crossed out and it's written territory. So they were really quick to organize to make sure they were taking care of each other. And then the car also includes a library, a resource section, stories from our community, and some artwork. So we'll get into that soon. So the backbone of this project are the stories of labor. There are so many stories of railroad labor in our communities, and Aubrey has really been guiding this process, and she'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit once we introduce the whole project to you all. But here in Laramie, we've focused on 3 railroading families, the Sanchez and Vigil families, who came from Mexico. They have sheep herding backgrounds, and then we started to work on the railroad. The Matsumara and Sonata families, Japanese American immigrants who were working on the railroad, then moved to California and returned to Wyoming when they were interned at Hart Mountain during World War II. And then the Angeli and Englert families, which is an Italian immigrant family who were working in the coal mines that were feeding the rail as well. So Aubrey had a really amazing process of working with these families, and the families really led the process and what they wanted to showcase, what they wanted to highlight. You can see here, this is the Vigil family actually laying out their photos that they wanted to showcase that are all centered around the wedding of these 2 families merging together, the Sanchez and Vigil families. That's Geraldine, Aubrey's dog, who's such a sweetheart, also helping with the process. So they were there every step of the way, making sure their stories were told in a way that felt authentic to their narratives as well. So ultimately, this is for them, right? This is their project. Their stories are being told in this space. these are just additional pictures. So here is Lena Newlin, who was one of the main storytellers for her family. And you can see there's ephemera here and pictures of her great grandfather, and also letters to folks in Green River from George Sonata here about their time in the room. And then the Angeli and Englert families, their sort of composition is all based around a kitchen scene, and you can flip through recipes from the grandma, and all of these photos posted up like a refrigerator in the space. So again, everybody is telling the stories how they want for them to be told. So again, here's another view of the boxcar, just looking back. So there is a labor library here, as well as some Union ephemera on the walls, and then the listening section in the back. Connor, I'm going to stop talking for a minute. Connor.
Sounds good. Thanks, Laura. Laura and Aubrey, quick question for us. Aubrey, do you want to talk about collection of oral histories while we have some of these slides kind of close by, or would you prefer I kind of launch into what my role was working with the artist team?
Yeah, thanks, Connor. Why don't you launch in, and then
Okay.
I'll circle
Sounds
back
like
once we
plan.
finish this presentation.
I'll jump right in. Thanks, Renee. Thanks, Laura and Aubrey, for being here with me today. And thanks to all of you for being here today. My name is Conor Mullen. I'm an artist and an organizer. Now in Denver, was based in Laramie. Wyoming's been home, a place I call home for a very, very long time. So I'm looking for, there's those slides. Thanks. So my role with the project was to lead a small team of artists who were tasked with creating installations for both inside and outside of the boxcar. And luckily for me, or happily for me, I got to also make some of my own creative contributions for the project. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we formed the artist team, how that artist team worked together, how the creative process flowed to get us to what we are seeing in the slides today. And yeah, just tell a little bit about each of the artists on the team and some of the works that they've made. So jumping right in, to form the artist team, Laura, through Laramie Public Art Coalition, put out an artist call, which went national, went regional, and we were looking for artists, creatives, people who wanted to be involved with the artist team part of the project, who had strong creative or familial connections to railroad history, early Wyoming railroad history, labor, and anything that might be kind of a connector for them in this project. So you can probably imagine there's a variety of ways that people could creatively connect to this project, but it's also pretty niche. As someone pointed out in the chat, Wyoming's a big landscape with not many people. And if we're looking to connect with people who might have early railroaders in their family history who are also artists, you can imagine that's a pretty niche, pretty small population. But surprisingly, we did get a decent number of submissions to our call for artists. And Laura and Aubrey and I labored over those applications, gave them a lot of time and consideration, and came up with a team of 5 artists who arrived at the project from a variety of different backgrounds. Some of them were emerging, just starting their creative or artistic career. Others were definitely more established and practiced in being professional artists. And then everyone in between. Along those same lines, some artists definitely had family ties, roots to early Wyoming Railroad labor history. Others, their work is very closely tied to concepts of labor. And then again, everybody in between. So our team of 5 artists plus myself were brought together back in April, which feels like forever ago to me, having completed this project, but actually was not long ago at all. So the project, as you can see, we'll return to this theme of how quickly this thing came together. One interesting thing before I keep moving forward that I think I can say for each of the team members is that all of us throughout the creative process Really enjoyed learning more and more about railroad history, our family histories, our own family histories, and each other's family histories. And on that note, could I get to the next slide? For me personally, I felt comfortable taking on the role of artist lead on this project when Aubrey and Laura asked me to, because I knew in my family background, I had a great-great-grandpa, Frank Pierce Anders, who ran a restaurant and sort of a lodging operation for railroad workers up in Lone Pine, Nebraska. That I only knew that he ran the restaurant, but that was for me enough of a connection conceptually to feel comfortable leading the team. However, as I worked with the team and on my own artworks, I came to learn that Frank was actually a railroad laborer himself. He was a locomotive fireman, so his job was shoveling coal to keep the engine going, a really dangerous, really strenuous job. And so I enjoyed learning more about my family history, and I know other artists enjoyed and really took meaning out of doing that same research themselves. The image on the left is the old building where the restaurant was in Lone Pine, and the image on the right is Frank feeding a bunch of ducks. So next slide, please. So as an artist team, we wanted to, we started meeting out early on with an in-person orientation, and then devised some sort of monthly and bi-weekly meetings to follow for planning, for discussions, for feedback and everything like that. But right from the get-go, we knew as a team that we wanted the artworks that came out of our team effort to, one, reflect sort of the individual voices that we as artists were bringing to the table, but also two, we wanted those artworks to come together to tell the larger story of the immigrant laborers who came to Wyoming from all over the world, really, to build the railroad, everywhere from Greece, Italy, China, Mexico, Japan, and Ireland, just to name a few of the places that these immigrant workers came to Wyoming to do this work around. So starting earlier this year in April, we worked together to plan for the project together. But right from the get-go, we started out on day one by setting up some intentions, some hopes, and some values that we wanted to carry throughout the project as a team. And those values and those hopes not only reflected how we wanted to work together as a team, but also we're outward facing. How did we want the artwork to engage with the public? How did we want the artwork to come to represent some of these stories that some of them were our stories and some of them were stories that were being shared with us. So right from the get-go, this project was a very values, ethics driven, creative, collaborative project. Let's see here. We developed our calendar of monthly meetings. We came up with some consensus building exercises for those times when we have maybe creative or logistical disagreements, and it came in handy. And then, to get to where we are today, the artworks inside and outside of the boxcar, each artist got to do some of their research, some of their sketching, and come up with sort of a proposal for what kind of artwork they wanted to pitch for this project. I then, in a move of, well, kind of learning my way through this this process and this project, took everything that I was seeing and hearing from the artists and their proposals and pitched them back sort of a blueprint for how and where their artworks could work in tandem together, both inside and outside of the boxcar. And on a personal note, to a group like this, I wasn't sure how that pitch was going to go, but I was open to having to rely on some consensus building exercises or going back to the drawing board if I was looking at a team of artists that were not pleased with my blueprint. But it went pretty smoothly, and I think everybody was happy with where their artwork was planned to be. So that was good for our timeline again, and went off with basically went on without much of a hitch. So so that was good. Let's see. Last note on that before I dive into some of the artworks. From start to finish, the process was really iterative, collaborative, conversation-based, and it wasn't always easy. And I think that's to be expected with something that bears a lot of meaning and a lot of creativity and a lot of different voices, a lot of team members, but we pulled it off in a really short amount of time. So let's go to the next slide. And we're going to start checking out some of these artworks that came to be from the 6 artists on our team. So this first one is by our friend Irini Lenardaki. Irini's work takes landscapes, environments, spaces, atmospheres that carry stories. And she uses a collage technique of collecting fabrics, patterns, textiles, things that are pulled from the human identities in those environments that tell those stories. And she uses those patterns, fabrics, textiles to sort of build or recreate a landscape that is familiar to that setting. So the fabric landscape that you're seeing here on the side of the boxcar that's really colorful and beautiful, that is a landscape that's familiar to us in Laramie and that wasn't far away from where railroad laborers were working. And many of the fabrics are near and dear to people that shared their stories with us or that represent groups and identities of people who were part of that history of building the railroad. So Irini's work, I Wake Up to the Sound of Mountains or Walking Against the Wind, is one of the larger pieces on this side of the boxcar. Let's check out another artwork in the next slide. So this is on the opposite side of the boxcar. What we're thinking of is the front of the boxcar with the entrance there. This artwork's by Amanda Pittman, who is from the railroad community of Green River, Wyoming. So it's appropriate that Amanda's artwork talks about the connection between water or rivers and the construction of the railroad. This kind of twisting and serpentining, sort of striped blue and white stream that you see running across the boxcar represents some of the riverways that lent natural resources to the construction of the railroad, but also a steam trail that would be jetting out from the back of one of these or from the top of one of these boxcars or engines as they're making their way across the landscape. And it's a little bit difficult to see in the photos, but the black sort of landscape at the bottom that refers to mountains is actually the line of elevation that the railroad traversed from Omaha all the way to San Francisco. So Amanda worked hard, put a lot of research and thoughtfulness into her work and had to navigate painting a mural on a door which opens and closes, and she pulled it off in a genius way. Let's check out the next piece. So these next 2 works are from Angel Garcia. Angel's portraits here are of family members in her railroader family history. We have Pat, Juan, and little Joe seen here bordered with some gold leaf and sort of a shout out to the Golden Spike, which joined the Union Pacific with the Central Pacific Railroad in Utah. Angel's family members have worked for the railroad, and she was great to share some of her family history with us from the Cheyenne area. She also did this painting titled Labor of the Erased. The painting gives viewers a good sense of the landscape out here, as well as the vastness that laborers were pushing through as they laid tracks down, sometimes upwards of 5 miles of track a day. Going right along here. This next piece is by Michael Chavez. The title is La Barra. Michael's work is a revisited artwork which uses old railroad spike buckets here that you can see in the image on the left to illuminate windows where we can see several generations worth of the railroader family members in his lineage. So inside are some electronics and lighting sort of mechanisms that really help to illuminate the boxcar, but also draw us into some of his family history, his family moved to the Laramie area from the San Luis Valley to help build the railroad. So Michael is one of those artists with close family ties to early railroad construction. And let's check out the next slide. And while I'm thinking about it, one thing I am going to mention and drop in the chat is I'm just skimming over these artworks, and they're all layered with so much meaning. So I'm dropping in the chat a link to a portion of our website where you can dive deeper and learn more about each one of these artworks. But we're going to keep it moving along because we want to hear questions and have discussion with you too. And we got to hear from Aubrey. So this next artwork's from Karen Vaughn. In Karen's artwork, we see an upside down set of railroad tracks inside the boxcar. The tracks are colored and coated with homemade paint that Karen makes at home using soil minerals found at various east to west stops along Wyoming's railroad. Karen is a soil scientist turned artist turned sailor. She does all sorts of things. So Karen wears many hats, and her work here pulls on those backgrounds. And there's more details to her work in that link in the chat there. But the codes on Karen's work come from the Munsell code, which is used for classifying rocks, sediments, and soils. So Karen, like other artists, really took every opportunity in the artwork and the choices she was making to express meaning, convey meaning and story about the railroad. These last couple works I'm going to talk about are mine. This one, I wanted to, long story short, make a sort of larger format stereogram or stereoscope. Stereoscopes were a popular photographic technique or format around the time of the construction of the railroad, where you take 1 and 2 images that would combine through a viewer to make a third image that would optically give you sort of a 3-dimensional sense of space. I took an image that I was able to locate through the state archives of a group of Japanese immigrant laborers who were working on the tracks not far from Laramie. And I worked with one of the family members that Laura mentioned to take some fabrics from her family history and to actually sew those or make them appear to be sewn into the tracks to rhyme off of Irene's work and also describe some of Lena's family history in the landscape here in Wyoming. And the last one I will talk about here is titled Sea Change. So these lenticular prints that you're seeing here, once again, play with 1 and 2 images like I was in the stereogram. On the one main image, we're seeing, let's see, an image from the 1913 Buffalo nickel. And as the image shifts, you start to see Edward Muybridge's Buffalo Galloping, or at least a segment from that plate. My thinking around the piece was that we needed to mention, or we needed to acknowledge what was happening to the ecosystem and keystone species like the buffalo with construction of the railroad. And so in the shifting of the image, we see, one of the last remaining Great Plains members of, one of the last remaining members of the Great Plains buffalo species charging headfirst into its 5-cent replica to make a remark that through destruction of that species, we were making a trade-off, a capitalist trade-off there that almost drove the species extinct. So that's my piece. I think there's maybe one more slide here. The last thing I'll say is behind each one of these artists that was on the team was also a team of supporters and people that lent hands and help to making their projects happen, whether it was electricians or carpenters, etc. This is our friend Gary Havener, who was helping me make some framing devices in his wood shop / barn outside of Laramie. But behind each one of these artists was a whole community of people, family, friends, colleagues, collaborators that helped make each one of these creative contributions on the boxcar happen. And that's enough from me. So I think I'll probably pass it over to Aubrey, or I don't know, where would we like to go from here?
Yeah, so I think it would be awesome, Aubrey, if you can tell us a little bit more about the story collection and story sharing and what that looks like and how that process unfolded.
Yeah, for sure. First, thank you so much, everyone, for being in community with us today to talk about this work. I also like to start talking about this work that is very honorable For me, by positing Wyoming as having the dubious distinction of being the only state that does not have a refugee resettlement program. So when we talk about how our state's economy, infrastructure, and communities were built by immigrants, that is just something I like for us to have a lens with of how powerful this work is to share out and amplify these stories on a landscape that is not always welcoming, right, to folks that have built this place. So I'm a historical archaeologist by training. That means I like stuff from the past 100 years. I am also a collaborative ethnographer, which is a fancy way of saying I do cultural anthropology, and I do that publicly, which means I do that to be in service to people. And my work is to work alongside folks to help co-create platforms to share out stories of place. So a lot of my research in Wyoming, as Laura mentioned, I come from the swamps of New Orleans. So a lot of my work up here is how do we tell stories of labor that have been buried, right? How do we tell stories of immigrant contribution that have been buried, right? How do we expand to tell these narratives of westward expansion? And who are the folks that built this place that we now call home? I also want to note, right, looking in the chat, that first question, what do you think of when you think of Wyoming? Cowboys, right? That is what is pumped out, right? And an audit of monuments across our landscape will show, as I'm sure you can imagine, a disproportionate amount of monuments to lone white men on horses that were ostensibly pulling up their bootstraps. But we know that these communities that came to work and build Wyoming, y'all, they were socialists, right? These are folks that took care of each other, right? Through organizing, through unionization, through social clubs, through mutual aid. So this is also a big part of the story that disrupts a mythological master narrative of our state, right? Like we pull up bootstraps here. It's like, no, we don't. We actually take care of each other, right? And so we're one of 10 states that has yet to expand Medicaid because we're not socialist. But I have sat with a whole lot of artifacts from Slovenian coal miners and railroaders that show actually we were socialists here in Wyoming. So that's what drives my work to work within communities here. So my process is I do something that's just called snowballing, right? So
That's to my little twin. Stop playing with my little twin right here, bro. Yeah, one. He don't even be going to the store ask for a size 25 and pay.
I don't know what that was. Was that a Zoom bomb? Is that what that is?
I feel like that maybe.
I don't know, but I did take them out. So sorry. Sorry, Duke Banks, if you were a public art colleague that I just asked to leave. I apologize.
How does the internet work? So when we first started doing this project, right, I was reaching out to folks in the community and was like, hey, who do you know, Linda, that is of railroad ancestry here? Oh, you need to talk to this person. So I would go talk to that person. Hey, who do you know whose family came up to build this place here in Laramie, right? Well, you need to go talk to this person. So a lot of the work that I do is simply relationship building, letting folks know what we were doing, what this project was. So spent a few months really sitting with families. I had a lot of pie at Perkins with old timers. I drank a lot of coffee around kitchen tables of really working with folks to make sure they had a clear understanding of what we were doing, why we wanted to tell their story, and how we could do that where they were part of that process every step of the way. For any folks in this call who happen to do story gathering or oral history work, we'll often find that folks are like, my story is not important. It's like, no, actually, these stories are incredibly important that we tell, right? These narratives of who built this place. So I spent many months building relationships with folks, connecting with a whole bunch of families. And then working specifically just for this installation with 3 families. And this was meeting with them every week, right? And walking through processes. So first collecting stories, listening to them talk for hours and recording that. And then I would kind of go through and find some thematic analysis in there. What were they talking about? What was important to them as a descendant, telling their ancestor stories? And then we would meet again. What photos did they have? What objects did they have? What did they want to put in a public space to help tell their ancestors' stories? And then I would create a mock-up, right? Hearing, right? Listening to them, seeing what they had that they wanted to share. Share that mock-up back with them. Does this look right? Do you want to make any changes? Do you want to edit it? You want to move this around? So again, every step of the process, I was working with folks to make sure I was honoring the way they wanted to tell their own family stories. Until, as we saw at the photo, the V-Hills laying out their images, folks came in to actually install with me after fabrication and place everything just so. And oftentimes they would step away to cry for some time, seeing their ancestors elevated in this space. So that was kind of how my work played out. And I will say, my ongoing work with this project is I get the honor of continuing to listen, right? So now that this is in the public sphere, folks know this exists, and they're like, wait, can I tell my story too? It's like, absolutely. So part of this work is gathering these stories that are gifted to us because they are gifts, right? We're working with a couple labor archives to store those oral histories, ephemera, photographs. We're also going to have digital archives on our site. We just launched, and this is just the beginning of our project. This is a multi-year project. So these stories, these photos as well, will be printed in small books. So whoever sits with me to gift and share their stories will print a couple copies of the book. They'll get as many as they want, and then a copy will live in our library in the train car. So as the train actually moves locations, we are literally traveling stories across space and time, right? Where folks in other communities along the I-80 corridor, which is historically the transcontinental rail line, they can engage with labor stories from other communities that maybe popped up before them. So I think I gave quite a bit. So I'm going to throw it back to Laura, and I can't wait to hear some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Aubrey. That was awesome. We have since mentioned a few times, we did open the project on September 27th with a big opening celebration. Here in this photo, you can see all of the artists and the storytellers, so the families that were able to come to the opening and be there to celebrate the start of this project that is a multi-year project that is just going to continue to collect stories and share stories with communities here in Wyoming. And it has been, we've had open hours through the month of October, and even at those open hours, we're hearing stories, right? And I think that's something that a project like High Iron does inspire, like Conor had pointed out, so just the research into his family history. And I think all of us, just the research that we've been able to do in our own families, and it makes other people think too when they come to visit, like, oh wait, this feels very familiar, or there's something here that resonates with me, or it's very connected. And we've had many of those already when people walk through and just feel that connection and have that history in their own families, which has been really amazing. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and we'd love to take some questions from you all. If anybody has some questions about specifics, let's see. Will the train actually travel to other communities on a railroad? Unfortunately, no, it will not be on the track. So if you see in the photos, it actually doesn't have wheels, which was great for us, because when you think about logistics of moving the car from, we moved it already from Idaho to Wyoming, the not having wheels made it a lot less heavy. So the boxcar itself is about 28,000 pounds. We were able to move it by a flatbed truck, with an oversized designation. And so then we used a crane to just lift it off, and I won't even tell you how we put it on the truck because I'm like, OSHA, where we bought it, the man in Idaho was like, oh, I have a system, and that system did not involve a crane, so we just left that up to, we'll see, it'll get to Wyoming. So in the same way, we're going to move it across the state that way. We had been in talks, so we've been in communication with Union Pacific, which is the line still currently here in Wyoming. And they were not open to us moving it on the rails. So that was sort of in early conversations because we knew we wanted it to be a moving thing, but it was not going to be possible with the level of sort of regulations that we needed to go through. Okay, are there other projects about labor history?
I meant with the Monument Lab cohort. Like, can you
Oh.
talk a little bit about the whole bigger movement that you're part of?
Yes, somebody want to take that? You want me to take it?
Sure, I'll take it. Yeah, so thanks for that question. So we are, it's a great privilege to be a part of Monument Lab's regeneration cohort for 2024. And I want to shine light on Kenzie Walker, who's on this call, who was part of the previous cohort of regeneration. And essentially, through Mullen funding, Monument Lab identified through an open call of nearly 800 applications, invited 10 teams nationwide who are doing work of reimagining and democratizing what we celebrate on our landscape. So we are one of 10 teams that are in community together, supported by the Monument Lab research umbrella and those resources. We meet every month. And so it's been a real joy to work alongside these folks. Nice. Oh, hi, Sean. Yeah, your work's great. To work alongside these folks and have that support. And there is a link here for the Monument Lab regen team.
There is a project that is directly related to labor in our cohort in Minnesota. Their project is called You Betcha, and it's about the farmer labor movement in Minnesota in our cohort.
Yeah. And I'm gonna, if it's okay while I'm here, Jennifer, thank you for this question. I'm gonna read it out loud. How does this project connect with your ongoing work and areas of interest? Is the way you're organized your work with families similar to, oh yeah. So yeah, thanks for that question. So I will say, I did a lot of this collaborative ethnographic work, specifically as a cultural anthropologist in New Orleans for a really, really long time, working with folks there to help tell stories of cultural practice and place. The moment I got to Wyoming, I was like, this place is crazy. Like in New Orleans, we have an abundance of amazing storytellers. And in a place like Wyoming that is so big, with a population of about 550,000 people, there's a lot of space to tell a lot of stories that haven't come into the public sphere before. So some of my other work that I'm doing, I mentioned earlier in the chat, Local 1307 of United Mine Workers of America. I've been working to preserve coal heritage with multi-generational mine workers in Diamondville and Kemmerer, Wyoming, to preserve these stories of coal labor as that town transitions to a Bill Gates-backed nuclear power plant. Somebody here mentioned, when I think of Wyoming, I think of coal. Yeah, we've got the most dead dinosaurs, y'all. There were some plates that came up and pushed up some dinosaurs, and now we've got billions and billions of tons of coal. So while we are moving to transition from fossil fuels, what's really important to me in my work here in the state is how do we honor immigrant labor histories, specifically around coal production, and unionizing around coal. So that's a lot of work that I do too, is I listen to a lot of miners and descendants of miners. So thanks for that question.
Any other questions? Let's see. Could you talk a little bit more about how programming will be organized in localities to which the boxcar will be traveling? That's a really good question, Andrew. So, part of when, and this is something that I think is new to me as somebody who is also new to Wyoming, is we talked a little bit about this, is how disconnected the communities are from one another. So part of our process is going to be a lot of relationship building with every one of the communities that we're visiting. So starting now, even though the project, we just closed it for the winter, it is winter here in Wyoming starting tomorrow, actually. But we are already starting the process of relationship building with the next community that it's going to go to, even though in the springtime, it'll still be here in Laramie, and we'll be doing some public programming and outreach opportunities for a few months here in Laramie before it travels to Cheyenne, which is the next spot. And Aubrey has already been working with families there to sort of start that story collection. But we also need to build relationships with organizations who are on the ground in Cheyenne, and that will be the same in every community that we visit. So again, we're not close to Cheyenne. It is our closest neighbor, right? But it's still an hour away from us here. And so we'll need to have those really close collaborations with community organizations that will help us really staff like the open hours of the project, but also connect us with the people we need to be connected with in the community, so it can be as fruitful as it is here, right? In terms of, we have these connections here in Laramie because we're here in Laramie. And so we need to continue making relationships with people in other places across the state. And it will look different in every place. And Aubrey, if you want to speak to
And if I could just say something very quickly. So I think what we didn't mention is as this moves to the next community, we're going to add additional artists onto this project. So we'll put out another call for artists to continue to transform this thing. And the inside installations that mirror family histories and descendant storytelling, that will also change. So for the next community, those installations will change to mirror that next community and descendants that live there and call that home. And programming, y'all, we can't wait for spring and summer. We're going to have dinners. We're going to have dance parties. We're going to have poetry readings. I mean, we're going to have art workshops. So I think what's beautiful about having a living monument to rail labor, our other monuments are to horrible mine disasters and people that have died, right? But this is to folks that are living and continuing to do this work, is we get to activate it and we get to do beautiful things within our community and have like some folks, our dance professor wants to choreograph a piece there. Amazing, right? So how can the community own this and use it and continue to amplify and tell stories?
Thanks, Aubrey. Question from Kenzie. Have y'all been met with any resistance by industry or otherwise? So
This meeting is being recorded. No, I'm kidding.
it's fine.
No, I know, I'm just kidding.
So I think actually when we, we're having the initial conversations as we started to build out this project, I think there was the initial thought that the Union Pacific as an organization would actually be more involved in the project. But then as we started listening, right, we learned from the Union Pacific and from those who work for the Union Pacific, they actually have a very contentious relationship with labor. And they'll actually be the first ones that say that to you, right? So we pivoted, right? Of like, instead of working or getting money from the UP, we want to be uplifting the stories of the people who are laboring on the rail and not telling the story of the Union Pacific. And so I wouldn't say it wasn't necessarily like a contentious thing, but more of a shift in where we thought about collaborators, right?
Yeah, and I want to note too, I'm working closely with lots of really rad union folks, right? And so it's like, when we talk about what's on our landscape, capital and labor are always battling over public memory. And we're like, wait a minute, we don't want any money from UP. We don't want to involve fucking UP, right? But what we want to do is we want to center labor and work with these folks. So great question, not so much contention, but like actively choosing to not be inclusive of capital.
Any other questions? I mean, I will say, so we're very fortunate this first iteration of High Iron was funded through Monument Lab and through the Regeneration 2024 cohort that it's been awesome to be a part of. Sort of our continuing community outreach is funded through now Arts Here, which is a new program of the NEA. So we're very fortunate to have some funding for the next 2 years to do some additional programming. But we're still, constantly thinking about ways to continue to fund the project. And really, most importantly, and something that is always top of mind, is funding the labor for the project. So for the artist labor, those are things that we are very conscious of too moving forward, because it's been it's not a challenge, but a challenge, right? Of making sure we have enough money to do the work. Any other questions? Everybody good?
Come visit Wyoming.
Aubrey, we're good?
Yeah, no, I feel great. And I'm gonna put our team email as well as my personal email in here. If anybody has any further questions, I would just sure love to chat with y'all. Oh, how is this conceived of? Well, I will say very quickly as we start the presentation, there's not a single monument in the state of Wyoming to the people who built the railroad. There's not a single monument to that labor, but there is one monument that's like a monolithic pyramid, as if to great pharaohs, that's to the 2 white men that funded and swindled, right? The UP, they were grifters. So that's what's on our landscape, but there's nothing to the people that built this place.
Thank
Well,
you.
closing comments. I think I just want to make sure, Laura, that you didn't have anything else to share before we wrap up. Well, thank you so much for joining this PAX talk tonight. Anyone joined late and you're like, who even organized this? It was Public Art Exchange. Laura and I and a couple other folks on the call serve on the programming committee. If you have a project in your community that you want to do a PAX talk about, reach out to us. And I think I can share my screen and show the little logo again. We are always looking for good programming. It is free to join. Our events are free to attend. The last one we had was kind of a deep dive into the General Services Administration's program. So that was super interesting to learn about. We really like to try to connect artists who are working in the public realm and public art, colleagues from all over the country. So please get in touch with us. Join us on Public Art Exchange, our web platform, our listserv, and don't be shy if you would like to donate to support our future programs. So thanks so much. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Aubrey. Thank you, Conor. And yeah, definitely go out to Laramie and see some of the incredible things that have happened out there.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you all.
Good night, everybody.